And I'd like to turn the room over to Debra Chromy, who will be our first presenter today. And to save time, I'll dispense with reviewing her extensive background and credentials. And you can find her on the Guidance Symposium website if you'd like to gain her contact information and to learn more about her. So I'm Debra, just going to make you a co-host and let me know if that's green light go for you.
Great.
Debra, wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Charles, for having me back again virtually this time, hopefully in person in the future. As Charles mentioned, my name is Debra Chromy. I'm president of Education Finance Council. EFC is the National Trade Association representing state-based nonprofit organizations who have a mission of increasing access and affordability of post-secondary education, as well as helping borrowers to successfully manage their student loan debt. So in Connecticut, you know, one of the members is CHESLA. In Massachusetts, MIFA, Rhode Island, RISLA, Vermont, BSAC. So you have a sense of the types of organizations we represent in Washington. And we are their advocacy arm in Washington. In talking with Charles about, what might be most helpful to share with you today, I'm going to focus on the Biden administration's plans to address issues related specifically to the cost of higher education and student loan debt. So I'm going to focus on probably 4 or 5 areas, starting off with free community college. I'm sure many of you saw in President Biden's proposal unveiled in April. It was part of his $1.8 trillion American Families Plan. And it would waive tuition for 2 years at public community colleges. It would also provide many students with cash to cover living expenses. We've seen in the past, and you may be aware of this as well, some folks are not able to go to community college or stay in community college because of living expenses that they also are incurring them. So they're putting some money into that. It's about $256 billion over 10 years. So it breaks out this way. $109 billion would actually go to states to waive community college tuition. So the federal government's goal is to replace 2/3 of that cost with states paying 1/3 of it. So that means that for states to participate in this, they have to be willing to put some money in as well. There's also $62 billion that's going to go into to help community colleges improve services around tutoring and counseling. And then another $85 billion for what I talked about to help low and middle income students with living expenses. The Biden campaign, you may remember when he was campaigning for president, he talked about tuition-free college for both 2-year and 4-year institutions. We did not see that in the American Families Plan, only the 2-year piece. And I'll talk a little bit later on about why we didn't see anything for 4-year institutions. But still focusing a little bit on community colleges. The White House believes that this will lead to, by opening these programs up, it will lead to more Americans enrolling in community college, gaining skills, landing well-paying jobs, and in turn boosting incomes and the U.S. economic competitiveness, while also decreasing student debt. Republicans and some academics on both the left and right say that community college is already inexpensive, and making it free won't sufficiently address deep-seated problems within the system, which is high dropout rates and entering students that are unprepared for college readiness. So there's still a lot of debate around this, and I'll talk a little bit about the makeup of Congress and the likelihood of this moving forward. But it is a bold plan and different from what we've seen in the past, and I think has something to do with the First Lady and her connection to community colleges is why this is so near and dear. The second thing we saw in the American Families Plan is an increase in funding for HBCUs and other minority serving institutions. So about $39 billion was proposed to provide 2 years of subsidized tuition for students from families earning less than $125,000 that are enrolled in 4-year historically Black colleges, tribally controlled universities, or minority serving institutions. This is one that I think probably will make it through, but we'll have to watch and see, because there's been a big focus on making sure that these institutions are able to continue on and survive. A third proposal in the American Families Act was doubling scholarships for teachers. So taking that right now from $4,000 to $8,000 per year. The Biden plan also targets about $400 million for teacher preparation at minority serving institutions and $900 million for the development of special education teachers. So a lot of money in the teacher space. And again, I think this one has general support as well. The fourth, and I think a program you're all very familiar with, is the Pell Grant program. And while President Biden campaigned on doubling the Pell Grant, what we saw in the American Families Act was only an increase from of about $1,400 a year to nearly $8,000 a year. And that's going to cost about $80 billion, but not the doubling that we've heard about. And I do know from conversations, I was just on the phone with staff yesterday in House Education Workforce Committee Chairman Bobby Scott's office, and they are strongly in support of doubling the Pell Grant. So I think it had to do with politics and cost, but we'll have to see how that plays out over time. So generally, this proposal from increasing the Pell Grant piece has support. There are about 7 million students who depend on the Pell Grant program. But as we know, that has not kept pace with the rising cost of college. Over the last 50 years, if you take a look at it, the value of the Pell Grant has really plummeted. And the maximum grant went from covering nearly 80% of the cost of a four-year college degree to under 30%. So it has, many people believe it is the leading reason why low-income students have started to have to take out education debt where they may not have had to in the past. So a number of people look at this as addressing the student debt issue, as well as making sure that there's the appropriate level of grant money available for this population. And so as we look at all of that overall, Republicans are not supportive of this aspect of the American Families Plan. In fact, House Ed and Workforce Ranking Member Virginia Foxx has referred to it as another socialist ploy. So that's going to make it difficult for something like this to pass. The resulting legislation that will come out of these proposals for college being tuition free, community college being tuition free, would need 10 votes from Republicans to pass in the Senate, unless Democrats try to sidestep that filibuster and use the reconciliation process. If they use the reconciliation process, they only need 50 votes in the Senate. And we believe that the drafted language would likely meet the requirements to be used in the budget reconciliation process. I won't go through the details, but there are certain rules around what can be included in budget reconciliation and what can't, which again would only require a simple majority vote. We know even if that happens, it would mean that all 50 Democrats in the Senate would have to vote in favor of it, which may not be as easy as we think. Some of you may remember when the American Rescue Plan Act, which passed in March, which had a lot of COVID relief built into it, it got held up for a little bit around the stimulus payments, and they had to be adjusted downward based on income, because Senator Manchin, a Democrat in West Virginia, was concerned about the high cost or the impact on the federal budget. So I suspect that Senator Manchin, also Senator Sinema, a couple of other Democrats who are much more moderate, may also propose changes to this in order to get something like this passed in the Senate. Again, I doubt that this can get passed under regular order, but if it goes through the reconciliation process and the Democrats are willing to make some adjustments, that could probably make it through on reconciliation. So one of the pieces that was not included in the American Families Plan, but we heard a lot about during the campaign and even more recently, was student loan forgiveness. And so a lot of folks have been asking, why wasn't it in there? And I will say probably two reasons. One is cost and the other is politics. I think there has been a lot of conversation about whether or not cancellation, student loan debt cancellation for four-year colleges or students who attended four-year colleges would seem like an elitist program and helping those who don't need it, instead of focusing those dollars on low-income, disadvantaged populations. So that's why it's not in there, or why I believe it's not in there. The other thing that's happening is that the White House has asked the administration to look into whether or not the president has the legal authority to do this through executive order. During the Trump administration, Secretary DeVos looked at this and came back and said, concluded that he did not. Senator Warren from Massachusetts and Senator Schumer are pushing pretty hard on $50,000 in debt relief, and Biden has been talking more about $10,000 in debt relief. So I think he's sort of pushed this over, is looking for another read from Secretary Cardona about whether or not he has the legal authority to do so. He would rather not do this through executive order. This is a high cost item, and he would much rather it go through the legislative process and have Congress deal with it. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. Meanwhile, if this was to move, and is more likely if it's going to move through the congressional process, not all Democrats are on board with this, not just the 50,000 to 10,000. So I think 50,000, I even think Secretary Warren knows 50,000 isn't going to happen, but I think she's pushing high to settle back around the $10,000 number. But even if they did settle on $10,000, House Ed and Workforce Chair Bobby Scott does not believe that this solves the problem of college affordability, that it only deals with a symptom of that problem. And I was on a conversation recently with Assistant Speaker Catherine Clark from Massachusetts. And she agreed that we really can't do loan forgiveness without also addressing college affordability, because all you've done is taken care of one group of students and not dealt with the bigger problem that's underlying that. The other issue in terms of looking at loan forgiveness is the cost. So the total cost of forgiving $10,000 across the board to everybody for one time, just 1 year, is $350 billion. One time. You could double the Pell Grant for 10 years, for that same amount of money. So when you stop and think about that, and you think about college affordability issues, it does make you pause and think, where is the best place to spend taxpayer dollars? We do have already built into our system loan forgiveness programs and IDR programs. And I would suggest that we look at how we might be able to tweak those instead of trying to add on another program, which is a one-time shot. The other thing, the other fear we have is if the loan forgiveness program does go through at $10,000, are people just going to borrow whatever they can because there's an expectation that debt will be forgiven going forward? Do colleges not pay attention to the need to keep college costs in check because loan debt could get forgiven in the future? So all that being said, I think it's highly unlikely that it will go forward at 50,000. And if it does move forward at 10,000, back to my comment about Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and other more moderate Democrats, that there would be a need to maybe make it more needs-based or really focused on those that are having difficulty repaying, which lines up with our current IDR programs and loan forgiveness programs. I'm going to stop there because I realize I am over my 15 minutes by a couple, but I think I've hit on all the points I wanted to hit on, and I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Deborah. If anyone does have any questions, just do the hand raising thing and Amanda will unmute you.
So I see that there is a question in the chat. And the question was, is it only federal loans? Those who refinance, consolidated their education loans would not have them forgiven even under the Senator Warren Uber plan. So that's a really great question. We don't have clarity right now on whether or not this would include just federally held loans, or if it would include private loans as well. My gut says it's going to be federal loans because I can't see Senator Warren sending a check to Sallie Mae or Navion to pay down a debt. I just can't see that happening. That being said, a case has been made that if somebody who has significant need had $5,000 in federal debt and $5,000 in a private loan, and it was a $10,000 program, and we forgave the federal government forgave $5,000 of federal, and he technically, this borrower might technically still have $5,000 remaining. and he's got a private loan. How do you deal with that? I think it's more likely that the federal government might offer an option for you to consolidate a private loan back into the federal loan program to take advantage of this. And I would only see it happening if it was really a need-based loan forgiveness program. So while I think it's highly unlikely that they will forgive private loans, it has not been clear. That is one of the open questions we're still dealing with.
Thank you. Any other questions for Debra before we transition? Any last questions? If either unmute yourself and call it out, or post it in the chat, or raise your hand and our operator will set you up.
I have a question. Just wondering if you have any sort of maybe philosophical thoughts about moving away from this notion that any assistance is sort of socialism, even if it's not.
Yeah. I think that if we, so as long as we have Democrats like Bernie Sanders who are described in a way as socialists, you're always going to have Republicans on the other side, throwing that back across at them. I think that is, I don't think it's real. I don't look at this as socialism. I look at it as an investment. And I think that there is probably some marketing that needs to be done around this program to get people to understand. And again, if it is focused on those that are coming from low income backgrounds, disadvantaged populations, even though I hear you, it could be viewed a little bit differently. But I think people love to throw around that word socialism. I think they just like it. It brings together a number of folks on the Republican side or the right side to be against a program.
Great, thank you. Debra, I think we'll have any other questions be directed to you offline or somehow through the chats, if that's okay, and we'll move along. Thank you, Debra, so much for coming out and participating. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. With that in mind, we're going to go ahead and transition to our second speaker. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Dr. Carolyn Sorkin. Carolyn and I have been friends for many, many years now, and I know she's going to talk about some of the crazy things happening in the admissions landscape. So, Carolyn, I will make you a co-host in case you need that. There you go. And by all means, thank you for joining us. Now, Carolyn, you are muted.